Hello, my AP History students. This is Wendy with AP History Help, and this is the AP History Help podcast, where you will learn everything you need to know about taking AP History classes, from skills to content, from historical thinking skills to themes in history. Whether you are taking or thinking about taking AP World History, AP History, or European History, this podcast, it's for you. Be sure to check out the episode list in the show notes to find the topics you need help with. AP History Help is on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, where I am happy to answer your questions. Before I start class, I'm going to talk briefly about what to expect from Season 2. Students, you might remember that Season 1 was focused on the skills, the themes, the strategies for success in your AP History class. Please, if you are new to our class, and or to AP History, look back through those episodes for further information on the skills side of the AP History courses, which includes how to write the various essays, how to tackle the multiple choice questions, and quite a few episodes focused on the different historical thinking skills. Looking ahead, this season will be predominantly content focused. And since I want to cover as much content as possible over the course of the school year and prior to the exams, I'm going to alternate between AP World and AP Push content. And AP Euro students, unfortunately, that content will come in Season 3 of the podcast. But if you need my help, just send me a message on social media or text, call, email me to ask any questions or even to set up some tutoring sessions. I also have a self-paced AP Euro class available, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. In today's episode, I will teach you Unit 2 of AP World History. Now, because the episodes this season are content-based, I would strongly recommend taking notes. There are a lot of ways to do that, but my recommendation is to do so thematically. I want you to focus especially on social, political, economic, cultural, and technological events and trends. Your best bet would be to have a copy of my Student Success Planner available through Amazon or from me by mail. I'll drop the link in the show notes to my website, which gives you the option to buy it either way. Oh, or you could go to my TikTok shop and buy it there. Find me at AP History Help. But at the very least, listen with a pen and a piece of paper. There will be a lot to learn today. Come in, students. Let's get this episode of AP History Help started. First, get those notes out. We've got a lot of thematic focus as well as some comparison and changing continuity. Our topic today is Unit 2 of AP World History. The time period is still circa 1200 to 1450, and the title is Networks of Exchange. Now, I prefer the longer title, Expansion and Intensification of Communication and Exchange Networks, as it really encompasses the nuances of these networks of exchange. Basically, we cover this in regions: Silk Road, the Mongols, Indian Ocean trade, and the Trans-Saharan trade routes. There are other themes in this unit, but economic, political, and cultural, those are the biggies this week. So let's begin with key concept 2.1, which is the Silk Road. This is probably the best known trade route in history. Talk about a continuity. Its beginnings go all the way back to 130 BCE when the Han Dynasty of China opened trade with the West. It is not an actual road nor a single route. It's a network of routes used for over 1,500 years. The focus in this time period is largely how it evolved or changed over time. Improved commercial practices led to an increased volume of trade and the expanded geographical range of existing trade routes, including the Silk Road, promoting the growth of powerful new trading cities. Demand for luxury goods increased in Afro-Eurasia. Chinese, Persian, and Indian artisans and merchants expanded their production of textiles and porcelains for export. Manufacture of iron and steel expanded in China. Now, they held a monopoly on silk production for thousands of years, but they lost the monopoly around 500 CE, as by then, despite the best efforts of the Chinese to keep it a secret, the Byzantines, Persians, and Japanese were all producing silk. Trade was in the hands of men. Wait. So AP World loves looking at the role of women, as their predominant role in history is to take the back seat and have minimal rights. So we compare from place to place and time to time what their role was. Chinese women were in charge of silk production. Well, technically, it was the silkworms that did the hard work, but the women tended the mulberry trees where the silkworms ate their leaves. Women unwound the cocoons, turned fibers into thread, and wove fibers into textiles. Their homes were primarily the site of silk production, with rural women as the main labor force. So women were making large contributions to the household economy and the state due to the tax revenue they generated and paid. By the 11th century, iron production in China had large and small-scale enterprises with hundreds of workers, some with just backyard furnaces, as they were providing the government with 32,000 suits of armor and 16 million arrowheads per year. They also used the metal for coins, tools, construction, and even bells in Buddhist monasteries. And the entire industry was largely fueled by coal. The Chinese emperors demanded tribute from the steppe nomads who would trade their horses for agricultural goods and silk. As more people traveled for trade, we see the growth and organization of caravanserai, basically roadside inns where travelers could rest and recover from the day's journey. These supported the flow of commerce, information, and people across the network of trade routes covering Asia, North Africa, and Southeastern Europe, especially along the Silk Roads. And with all this trade, Chinese technologies like gunpowder and the magnetic compass reached Europe. This would later help the Europeans when they began exploring and conquering other parts of the world. In addition, Buddhism from India spread widely throughout Central and East Asia as its universal messaging was preferred. But it changed as it spread and appealed to different groups of people. As it spread west, it only got so far as the Zoroastrian faith of the Persians put a stop to its appeal. The Silk Road also helped to spread disease from Asia to Europe, like smallpox and measles, but especially the plague in the mid-1300s, as it was transported by rats who followed the trade routes, both land and water, from China to Europe and would wipe out upwards of half of the population. Last, the rise of money economies, coupled with city dwellers dying from the plague, put an end to feudalism in Europe. No longer did you need land to be rich. And the idea of money or flying paper came from the Chinese. It has been said that China and the Islamic world, who came up with advances in science and math and innovations that would help in exploration and communication and even war, that they walked so that Europe could run. In other words, they put all the hard work in, and the Europeans took off with it. The largest land-based empire in history was established by, wait for it, the Mongols. Sorry, John Green, crash course reference there. They started out as pastoral or nomadic people in Central Asia, but built powerful and distinctive empires that integrated people and institutions from all over Asia. Thanks to the leadership and unifying actions of Genghis Khan, the Mongols dominated. They were not always nice people. They were quite violent as conquerors, to the point that many would surrender without a weapon raised, as the Mongol reputation preceded them. They created khanates by conquering Persia, Russia, and China. Each was treated differently, but for the most part, the Mongols didn't care about others' religion and allowed each region to worship as they chose. But governing was different, depending on various circumstances. Russia had it the worst in terms of the initial conquering, as the Mongols used biological warfare in the form of plague-infested bodies being flung over the city walls. But once they were victorious, they didn't stick around to govern. The Mongols just collected a tribute or heavy tax from them. In Persia, the takeover was quite abrupt and quite destructive, sacking the capital of Baghdad in 1258, putting an end to the Abbasid Caliphate. Over 200,000 people were massacred and much of their agriculture was damaged, and the Mongols turned it into pasture. As such, they stuck around and ruled more directly, rebuilt damaged cities, produced more wine. As you know, the Mongols were drinkers, and Persians, who were mostly Muslims, aren't supposed to drink. And interestingly, many of the Mongols who stayed here would end up converting to Islam. When the Mongol dynasty collapsed many years later, they weren't forced out like in China or Russia. Instead, they assimilated into Persian society. Last, in China, this was the most difficult of the Mongol conquests. It took them like 70 years. The Mongols made use of existing Chinese administrative practices like taxation and the postal service, called their dynasty in China the Yuan dynasty, and moved the capital to Beijing. They wouldn't allow the Chinese to rule. Instead, they got rid of the civil service system and brought in foreigners. They also forbade intermarriage and would not let the Chinese scholars learn Mongol script. Kublai Khan, who was Genghis Khan's grandson, ruled here. The legacy of the Mongols' rule in China would be that they really emphasized making the Silk Road safe, like really safe. Merchants could travel from one end to the other without fear of being robbed, which helped increase the volume of trade. Second, Kublai Khan welcomed Marco Polo into his court for a very long time, and Marco Polo would eventually write about his experiences. This would end up being how many Europeans learned about China. And fun fact, Christopher Columbus read Polo's book and got bit by the "I want to be an explorer" bug. Not that that is necessarily a good thing, but I digress. I guess I should mention Japan and the Mongols, as Japan was the exception to Mongol conquests. The Mongols failed to conquer Japan in 1274 and 1281. Both times they failed due to typhoons. A concept of kamikaze or divine wind was attributed. In 1281, they arrived with an armada of thousands of ships and 140,000 sailors and soldiers. As a result, there was this growing idea in China that the Japanese were brave and would defend their land. This also strengthened Japanese feelings of divine support and superiority. The Mongols had used Chinese and Korean help to create their ships, and Japan had refused to become a vassal state to Kublai Khan in China. The aftermath of both failed invasions was the destruction of the Mongol navy. They were great on horses, but water just wasn't their best theater for war. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, it became the sea version of the Silk Road. But boats carry a lot more than horses, camels, people, and carts. It was much cheaper, and trade was for mass markets rather than just luxury goods or small quantities. Geographically, the monsoons were a problem, limiting travel to just one direction for months at a time. But at least they were predictable. And as a result, sailors would travel across the Indian Ocean and then stay in one place waiting for favorable winds for months. They met women, and we see intercultural connections due to spending long periods in India. Powerful new trading cities developed, and new technologies like better sails, the compass, and astrolabe made sea trade quite profitable. I mentioned Srivijaya in Unit 1 of AP World, but they became an important sea route between China and India, taxing passing ships and also becoming a port for the spice trade. In addition, over on the east coast of Africa, the Swahili states, which stretched from modern day Somalia to Mozambique, emerged as trading cities and developed a new African merchant class. They traded gold, ivory, quartz, even leopard skins, and sometimes slaves from the African interior to markets in Arabia, Persia, India, and beyond. These states helped the rise of Great Zimbabwe, which became a powerful and wealthy middleman for the interior of Africa and the Swahili states. They are best known and frequently asked on the exam about their stone enclosures, which they didn't use mortar to build. And fun fact, Zimbabwe actually means houses of stone. Staying in Africa, but moving north to the Trans-Saharan trade networks, improved transportation technologies like the camel, saddle, and commercial practices led to an increased volume of trade and expanded the trade routes across the vast Saharan desert. The expansion of empires, including Mali and West Africa, facilitated Afro-Eurasian trade and communication as new people were drawn into the economies and trade networks. They were best known for trading salt, gold, and slaves, and merchants were attracted to the potential for wealth. As a result, Islam spread to North Africa through trade. Last, let me bring up the Bantu migrations, as I've seen this topic pop up on the AP exam. Bantu is used as a general label for the 300 to 600 ethnic groups in Africa who speak the Bantu languages, distributed from Cameroon east across Central Africa and Eastern Africa to Southern Africa. The migration of Bantu-speaking peoples who facilitated transmission of iron technologies and agricultural techniques in sub-Saharan Africa. So their spread led to the spread of ideas which benefited this region and beyond. Lastly, for Unit 2 of AP World, be sure to take a look at the intellectual and cultural effects of trade routes. Increased cross-cultural interactions resulted in the diffusion of literacy, artistic and cultural traditions, as well as scientific and technological innovations. This includes the diffusion of cultural traditions, like the influence of Buddhism in East Asia, the spread of Hinduism and Buddhism into Southeast Asia, and the spread of Islam in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. We also see the diffusion of scientific or technological innovations, like the spread of gunpowder and paper from China. I have so many more details in my AP World History self-paced course that's available on Outschool, or you can contact me directly and I can send it to you. for a discount of 20% off the Outschool price. Just email me at wendy@aphistoryhelp.com. I honestly didn't plan to plug that until I was writing this episode and seeing some of the details that I left out for time's sake. Before this class ends for today, let me talk about how you might have to show what you know from Unit 2. Now, this unit, just like Unit 1, represents 8 to 10% of the test. That would be maybe one set of multiple choice questions, but it's entirely possible that it could be one short answer question or SAQ, or possibly an LEQ. In the last 4 years, there have been 3 LEQs about the impact of trade and social or economic impacts. But you won't see this time period in a DBQ. DBQs start in the next time period, 1450 to 1750. Next episode, which will be released in 2 weeks on September 23rd, will be Unit 2 for AP US History, which moves on to the next time period there, 1607 to 1754. But just 2 weeks after that, on October 7th, you will be ready for Unit 3 of AP World, Land-Based Empires, in the period 1450 to 1750. In the meantime, review and practice the content. If you haven't already done so, get that student success planner from my website, from Amazon, or from the TikTok shop. Head on over to my website, aphistoryhelp.com, where you will see a bunch of ways to contact me. Feel free to do so with any questions you might have. I am here to help you. And that will do it for this episode of AP History Help. Don't forget to come back to Wendy for help in your AP History class. And this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.